What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about my top 5 favorite flagship phones. These are phones that I have personally tested. So if you're in the market for a new flagship phone, these are some great choices. I might make a part 2 because there are some flagship phones that I want to talk about that I have not used, but I still want to talk about them. So first is the Galaxy S22 Ultra. This phone is still roughly going to cost you around $1,000. It's still very expensive phone here. I've been using this phone. I use it as my main phone for a minute. I think one of the things that never gets old with this phone is the display. It's a beautiful edge-to-edge display. It's dynamic AMOLED, 120 hertz. It's HDR10 plus. It gets really bright at 1750 nits, and it's a 6.8-inch display. Just super vibrant colors, very high resolution at 1440p, 500 for the PPI. It's a beautiful display to look at always. So anytime I'm using this phone, I always appreciate the really nice vibrant display on here. The design on here is also pretty good. I think it reminds me of the LG Velvet a lot, and I really like that phone's design. So this one looks really great too. It's got an aluminum frame. It's got a glass back on here. It's IP68 dust and water resistant as well too. And you also have the built-in stylus now on the S series, so it's technically really a Note. And the stylus is great for jotting down notes and just navigating. If you're one of those people that don't like to, use your fingers, then it's great for that, honestly. And there's a ton of software to take advantage of the stylus, which I think is really great too. Not only this is going to have I believe a 4 or 5 year major OS lifespan, and then it's going to have another like 4 years or 5 years of security patches. So this is going to be a very long lifespan phone. So if you pick this phone up, you really won't have to update technically for another like 8 years. So it'll last a really long time with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chip and the Adreno 730. This phone is very powerful. Now, I did a PUBG drain test and it did a pretty good job with it. It got a little bit warm towards the end, but for the most part, it wasn't that bad with the updates. It's running a little bit cooler in my opinion. And also, this phone has 128 gigs and 8 gigs of RAM. That is something that I still don't like to this day. Like, let's say for instance with the Note 10 Plus, that phone launched with 256 gigs and 12 gigs of RAM as the base model. Samsung needs to go back to that if they're going to charge us $1,200 for a flagship phone. So this phone also does not have the best speakers. The speakers are okay. I want Samsung to improve the speakers definitely with the S23. The speakers are fine. They're just not as loud and the bass is not as good as compared to some other flagship phones. And also this phone has NFC. The under the display fingerprint sensor is really fast. And then all the bells and whistles as far as Samsung desktop support is really useful. Secured folders, all that good stuff is there. The real highlight with this phone is the 108 megapixel standard camera. Extremely high resolution, 10 megapixel periscope telephoto lens on here does 10x, and then another 10 megapixel telephoto does 3x, and then another 12 megapixel ultra wide, and you also have a macro mode. It shoots in 8K 24, and then you have a 40 megapixel selfie that shoots in 4K 60. You're gonna get top notch high quality shots. It does 100 times zoom, takes amazing photos at 30 times zoom. It is a very impressive phone when it comes to zoom shots. I think the best phone out right now when it comes to just the versatility with the all the cameras and stuff like that. I think it does a great job with image processing, color, all that good stuff. So it's a world-class camera for sure. You also have a fairly decent battery life, nothing too crazy here. It's a 5,000 milliamp battery, 45 watt charging. You have wireless and reverse wireless charging. Basically, I'm able to get around 6 hours of screen on time with this phone. Nothing, like I said, too crazy. But this is just an awesome phone for the money. Alright guys, next is the Pixel 7 Pro. This is a very impressive phone. It's really grown on me. Google fixed pretty much everything that was wrong about the Pixel 6 Pro. Almost everything, and I'm really impressed with this phone. It's a really nice experience, and I think Google had nailed the software experience this year with Android 13. It's very smooth, the animations and just the stock feeling and getting updates fast. I really enjoy that. The design on here has been slightly improved. I like the sort of metal camera design now. It's a very iconic design. You know it's a Pixel when you look at it. And yeah, aluminum frame, glass back. It's IP68. It has kind of like a more boxy feel. But what Google did here with this phone, which I really like, is that this phone has a 6.7-inch LTPO AMOLED display. It's 120 hertz HDR10 plus. 1500 nits peak brightness, but the curve is not as dramatic as the 6 Pro, which a lot of people like. I think it looks really good, and you don't get accidental touches with this phone at all now. So you do have 1440p resolution and 512 for the PPI, so it's just a beautiful display here. And also, this phone does have Google's new Tensor G2 chip, and then that has been performing pretty well, just playing games, multitasking, keeping up with the animations and stuff. It's been a very smooth experience with this phone. Like I said, it's not gonna kill like the top phones when it comes to like benchmarks and stuff like that, but like I said, this is a great phone for like all the AI stuff that Google is doing. It works really smoothly, so I don't think the average person will really notice too much of a difference from this and a S22 Ultra, right? So this phone does have 128 gigs of internal storage and 8 gigs of RAM on it, so very smooth performance there. The speakers are actually top notch on here. I love the speakers on this phone. Great bass quality on here. There's a really nice full sound. NFC is on board. The under the display fingerprint sensor has been improved from the 6 Pro. That works much better. And not only that, but Google actually introduced Face Unlock with this phone. So we do have Face Unlock on here, which is really sweet. And basically the highlight with this phone is the 50 megapixel standard lens, the 48 megapixel telephoto that does 5x now, and then we at 12 megapixel ultra wide. This also has a macro mode. It shoots in 4K 60 on the front and back, and it actually has a 10.8 ultra wide selfie camera, so you're able to get really nice wide shots. And the photos are just beautiful on the Pixel 7 Pro. I'm a big fan of Google's image processing on here, especially in just great lighting. It takes great photos in low lighting. It just takes some really, really awesome photos. So I absolutely love it. I think the only thing that's lackluster with the Pixel's camera experience is probably the video could be a little bit better compared to Galaxy and iPhone video. But in general, I really love the way just standard stills come out on this phone. I'm a huge fan of Google image processing. This phone actually has pretty good battery life, a 5,000 milliamp battery. It's got 23 watt charging, and then you also have wireless and reverse wireless charging on here. And my battery experience has been pretty good now that I've been able to use the phone. Standby time is really good. In general, this is a phone that can easily go all day. Alright guys, next is the iPhone 14 Pro, and for the most part this has been a pretty good experience. So it's got a stainless steel frame, it's got a glass back with the matte finish. I think the design feels nice, very nice luxury design as you'd expect from Apple. So Apple has the new dynamic island display on here, and basically you don't have the notch. It's a pill shape cutout, and it's been pretty good for the most part. Everything is just very animated. Multitasking is a little bit easier on the iPhone now, and for the most part it's a nice experience, or a nice addition to the iPhone lineup. And it has the pretty good display, a Super Retina XDR OLED display. It's 2000 nits peak brightness, so it's a very bright display. It's one of the things that I really enjoy with this phone. So when you're out in direct sunlight, it's really nice. And it's 6.1 inches, so it's somewhat fairly of a easy phone to hold. And then you have a basically like a 1080p plus resolution, 464 the PPI. It's a very nice display in general. So the Apple A16 chip has been blazing fast on this phone. It is rarely misses a beat when it comes to animations, and just maintains overall a very smooth experience. So this phone does have 128 gigs of internal storage and 6 gigs of RAM. The stereo speakers on this phone are pretty good, very good bass quality. They're pretty loud as well too. Face ID, of course, on here works really well. And then the camera on here. So you do have a 48 megapixel standard, a 12 megapixel telephoto with 3x optical zoom, and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide. It shoots in 4K 60, and then it has a 12 megapixel selfie that shoots in 4K 60. The cameras are pretty good. With the new 48 megapixel camera, you are able to get a little bit better detailed shots on the iPhone now, which is great. It has a macro mode. I think video is pretty good on here. The iPhone switches between the lenses really smoothly as well too, especially when you're recording. And overall, the experience is basically what you would expect. You're getting a top tier flagship quality camera. Like I said, I'm a big fan of iPhone video. It's really smooth, really crisp, especially when switching between lenses. Like I said, the ultra wide looks really great on here for video. So I'm a big fan of the iPhone video on here. Now, the battery life experience actually hasn't been as good as when I got the 13 Pro. So it has a 3200 milliamp battery, It's got fast charging, wireless, and MagSafe wireless charging. Basically, my battery life, I can get around 6 hours of screen on time, but I was getting much better battery life with the 13 Pro. So this is pretty much on par with all the rest of the flagship phones as far as screen on time. And not only that, but it charges like slow. It's slower compared to other flagship phones like the S22 Ultra that charges 45 watts. This only charges 15 watts. So for the most part, I do really like the 14 Pro. It's a pretty good experience. All right, so next is the ZENFONE 9. So I'm a big fan of like smaller phones, and this phone is just awesome. I think it's one of the top phones of this year. So it's got a plastic back, but it's got a texture to it, and it just feels still remains, you know, a premium feeling phone even with the plastic back. And again, it's more durable as well too, so if you drop it, you know, it's not gonna crack like glass. It's got an aluminum frame, IP68, dust and water resistant. It's got a 5.9-inch Super AMOLED display. It's 120 Hz HDR10 plus, and then it is 1100 nits peak brightness. It's 1080p 445 for the PPI. Overall, it's a really great display on here, so I had no issues with the display as far as color and as far as sharpness. This phone does run a kind of close to a stock version of Android. It has Android 12 with the Zen UI. Basically, it's not too heavy of a skin actually. So like I said, it's not a lot of bloatware. It's not a lot of stuff that ASUS throws in here. So the software experience to me is really clean, and the stuff that they do have in there is actually useful. This phone is running the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 Plus processor, and it's been a really good experience with that. It's fairly fast. It's excellent when it comes to gaming performance. So in general, I had no issues with performance. I didn't really have heating issues with this phone. This phone does have 128 gigs of internal storage and 6 gigs of RAM. No SD card support. You also have some amazing sounding stereo speakers, especially for the size of this phone. Great bass quality, just very full, loud sound. And to top it off, this phone actually has a headphone jack. So for anybody that wants a flagship phone with a headphone jack, this is definitely a great buy for you. The fingerprint scanner is side mounted on here, and that works really well. I was really happy with that performance. And this phone has a very good camera setup. It's a 50 megapixel standard and a 12 megapixel ultra wide. Unfortunately, there's no telephoto lens on here, but it does pretty good just with zoom shots in general. You know, just zoom in with the standard camera. Shoots in 8K24 with a 12 megapixel selfie that shoots in 4K 30. Image quality is basically what you would expect. It's pretty much on par with the rest of these phones as far as giving you a flagship quality experience with good light, low light. Is overall in general going to take you some really great shots. And you will be surprised, the battery life is really good on this phone, considering that it's a small phone. So it's got a 4300 milliamp battery, 30-watt charging, and then it has 5-watt reverse wired charging. Man, the battery life is good. It gets well over 6 hours of screen on time, about 7 hours of screen on time for me, and it's just been an excellent experience as far as the battery. Now, lastly was a phone that sort of went under the radar here. So the iPhone 13 mini. This is, again, I like these smaller phones. This one was an awesome experience as well too, because Apple pretty much fixed the main problem that this phone had. The 12 mini had was battery life. Battery life is very good on the 13 mini now, and you essentially have the same design here: aluminum frame, glass back. It's IP68. It has the same XDR OLED display. It gets 1200 nits peak brightness, and it's a 5.4-inch display. So if you like phones that are really small, this is the smallest that you can get. That's going to be like a modern day flagship. It's 1080p 476 for the PPI. Absolutely love using this phone. It's just really easy to hold. So anybody with smaller hands, I think you'll really love this phone. The Apple A15 chip is still extremely fast on here. So performance with, you know, opening apps, in general, like multitasking, gaming, is going to be a really great experience still. You have 128 gigs of internal storage and 4 gigs of RAM. You also have great sounding stereo speakers, especially for the size of this phone, very loud and full. And of course, Face ID is on here, all that good stuff. The cameras on here. So you have a dual camera setup. It's a 12 megapixel standard and a 12 megapixel ultra wide. It shoots in 4K 60, and then you have a 12 megapixel selfie that shoots in 4K 60 as well. The image quality to me is pretty much still on par with the iPhone 14 series. It takes basically the same shots. You know, if you take out the 48 megapixel It honestly takes the same shots, so you're gonna get flagship quality photos with this phone still. Of course, I honestly didn't see a big difference, and like I said, the big thing with this phone is that you're actually gonna get very good battery life, considering that the battery life is the battery is pretty small. So in general, I just really like this phone. So be sure to let me know what you guys think, and I will catch you guys in the next one.